That's a restricted area, ma'am. I don't know what department you're with, but the custodial staff finished their sweep an hour ago. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The words, dripping with condescending authority, echoed in the cathedral-like quiet of the Combat Information Center. The junior officers and enlisted ratings standing watch on the bridge of the USS Vigilance shifted their weight, a subtle, collective cringe rippling through the disciplined ranks. They studiously avoided looking at the woman in the simple gray contractor's jumpsuit, her back to the room, her attention seemingly fixed on a small, unassuming data slate. Commander Rex Thorne, the ship's newly assigned tactical action officer, took another step forward, planting himself directly behind her, his voice louder now, designed for the audience he felt he commanded. "Hello, did you hear me? This is the nerve center of a multi-billion-dollar warship, not a public library. Your access badge is... What is that, level 4? That gets you to mess hall and the laundry. It does not get you here." He let out a short, derisive laugh. The crowd, sensing his expectation, offered a few nervous chuckles in return. The woman didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply tapped the screen of her slate with a single deliberate finger, her posture one of placid, almost meditative calm. Thorne's face began to flush, his manufactured patience wearing thin. He saw a woman of indeterminate age, perhaps late 50s, with strands of silver woven into a tightly pinned bun of dark hair. She was of average height, average build, with a face that was utterly forgettable, the kind of person you'd pass in a corridor 100 times and never truly see. To him, she was an obstacle, a procedural anomaly, a nobody who had wandered out of her depth. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical, menacing whisper meant to carry. "I'm not going to ask you again. You are interfering with a critical pre-deployment system diagnostic. Whatever you think you're doing, you're not authorized to do it here. Now, turn around, hand me that slate, and escort yourself off my bridge before I have the Master-at-Arms do it for you from the command chair on the slightly elevated platform at the rear of the CIC." Captain Eva Rostova watched the exchange, a frown creasing her brow. She didn't know the woman, but something about her stillness, her complete and utter lack of reaction to Thorne's escalating aggression, set off a quiet alarm in her mind. It wasn't the posture of a lost contractor or a defiant subordinate. It was the posture of something else entirely, something ancient and immovable like a mountain enduring a storm. But when the captain saw the way the woman held the slate, not gripped in her hand, but balanced perfectly on her fingertips, her thumb resting on the lower bezel with a familiarity that spoke of thousands of hours of use, a forgotten memory stirred. It was a specific grip, a hold taught only to a certain generation of strategic analysts at the War College, a technique for maintaining stability in high-G maneuvers. Rostova's frown deepened. Thorne, meanwhile, had reached the end of his tether. He reached out, his hand about to fall on the woman's shoulder to physically turn her around. The air crackled with tension. If you believe that true authority is earned in silence, not shouted from a pedestal, type competence in the comments below. The commander's fingers were a mere inch from the gray fabric of the woman's jumpsuit when the synthetic, emotionless voice of the ship's central computer echoed through the CIC, cutting through the standoff like a blade. "Attention on deck. Initiate Aegis Combat Simulation Omega 7. Threat Profile, Red Horizon. Authorization, CNO Atlantic Fleet Command. Execution begins in 30 seconds. A wave of palpable shock washed over the crew. Omega 7. It was the Kobayashi Maru of naval simulations, a legendary, unwinnable scenario designed not for victory, but to test a command crew's breaking point. It was a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered in the academy halls, a brutal meat grinder of a test that no crew had ever successfully navigated. It was reserved for final carrier group certifications, not for a single destroyer's shakedown cruise. Thorne froze, his hand hovering in the air, his face paling. He snapped his head toward the main view screen, his personal drama instantly forgotten, replaced by the cold dread of impending professional failure. He should have had days of warning, hours of briefings. An unannounced Omega 7 was unheard of. It was a flag-level decision, a thunderbolt from on high. His mind raced, scrambling for excuses, for protocols, but all he found was a rising tide of panic. He had been so focused on asserting his petty dominance over a seemingly insignificant woman that he was now caught completely flat-footed. He stumbled back to the primary tactical console, his movements clumsy, his previous arrogance evaporating into a film of cold sweat on his brow. The woman, for her part, finally lowered her slate, placing it gently on a small, unoccupied patch of countertop. She turned, not to face Thorne, but to observe the massive holographic display that dominated the front of the CIC. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of serene neutrality. She was no longer an obstacle to Thorne. She was now just part of the furniture, an irrelevant ghost in the machine as the real crisis began. The 30-second countdown ticked away with agonizing slowness, each second a hammer blow against the sudden, tomb-like silence of the bridge. The junior officers strapped themselves into their consoles, their faces grim. They exchanged worried glances, the nervous energy in the room so thick it was almost a physical presence. Thorne, trying to regain some semblance of control, began barking orders, but his voice was a half-octave too high, betraying the fear that gripped him. Communications, verify the authorization code. I want confirmation from FleetCom now. Navigation, what's the initial threat vector? Weapons, bring all VLS cells to active standby. I need status reports people now. His commands were a chaotic spray of standard procedure, lacking any real strategic thought. He was reacting, not commanding. He was playing by a book that Omega 7 was designed to burn. The woman watched, her gaze sweeping across the anxious faces of the crew, her eyes lingering on the frantic, almost spastic movements of Commander Thorne. She saw his fear, his inadequacy, his utter collapse in the face of a challenge that exceeded the narrow confines of his ego. She saw the fragile foundation of his authority crumble into dust. And still, she did nothing. She simply stood, a pillar of calm in a rising sea of chaos, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She was an observer, a witness, a silent judge presiding over a trial that had already been decided. The final second of the countdown vanished from screen. The simulation began. The main holographic display, which had shown a serene blue ocean a moment before, exploded into a nightmare of angry red icons. The calm, synthetic voice of the computer began to narrate the apocalypse. Multiple inbound threat vectors detected. Bearing 090, initial wave of 32 SS. N, 27 Sizzler supersonic sea-skimming missiles. Time to impact, 180 seconds. Bearing 180, submerged contact presumed a Kula-class submarine. Launching multiple Type 53 torpedoes. Concurrent electronic warfare attack detected. Aegis network compromised. Satellite uplinks jammed. VLS cells 7, 9, and 12 are showing go signals. Launch authority compromised. The information came in a relentless, overwhelming flood. It was a multi-axis, combined arms assault designed to systematically dismantle a destroyer's defenses in minutes. Thorne stared, his mind unable to process the sheer volume of threats. His training had prepared him for single-wave attacks, for electronic jamming, for submarine threats, but never all at once, never in a perfectly coordinated symphony of destruction. His commands became more desperate, more contradictory. Launch SM-3s at the Sizzlers. All of them. Evasive maneuvers, hard to port. Countermeasures, launch everything we have. Somebody get me that satellite link back. A young ensign at the EW console looked up, his face ashen. Sir, launching countermeasures is useless. They're using our own radar frequencies to guide their missiles in. We're painting a target on ourselves, and the VLSLs are locked out by the EW attack. We can't fire. The blood drained from Thorne's face. He was trapped. Every defensive instinct, every textbook solution was being turned against him. The simulation was actively hunting him, using his own ship's systems as a weapon. The red icons on the screen crept closer, an inexorable tide of death. The torpedoes were closing. The Sizzlers were screaming towards them at Mach 3. The ship's projected hull integrity began to plummet on a secondary screen. 90%, 75%, 50%. A critical failure cascade warning began to flash, its rhythmic, urgent pulse a harbinger of total system collapse. The crew looked to their commander for guidance, for hope, for a plan. They found none. Rex Thorne stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of his console so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a statue of defeated arrogance, his mind a blank slate of pure, unadulterated terror. The confident, sneering officer of 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. He had been so eager to prove his superiority over a quiet, older woman in a gray jumpsuit, and now, in the face of a true test, he had been utterly and completely broken. The deafening symphony of alarms and warnings was the only sound in the CIC. The end was coming. The unwinnable scenario was living up to its name. Into that suffocating silence, a new sound emerged. It was quiet, almost imperceptible at first, the soft, rhythmic tapping of keys. All eyes in the CIC, including Thorne's, turned toward the source. The woman in the gray jumpsuit was no longer observing. She had moved to a small, auxiliary diagnostic console tucked away in a corner of the bridge, a station usually reserved for low-level maintenance checks and rarely used during active operations. Her back was once again to the room, but her hands, visible to those on the port side, were a blur of motion across the keyboard. They moved with an impossible combination of speed and precision, a surgeon's grace married to a concert pianist's dexterity. She wasn't typing frantically. There was a deep, ingrained rhythm to her work, a methodical cadence that seemed to impose its own logic onto the chaos unfolding around her. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't spoken a single word. She had simply identified the locus of failure, Thorne, and taken command. A young lieutenant next to the EW ensign whispered, "What is she doing? That's a dead-end terminal. It doesn't even have tactical command authority." But then, something impossible happened on the main screen. A single line of green code scrolled across the bottom of the Aegis display, a manual command override that no one on the bridge was authorized to execute. The ghost signals in the VLS cells vanished. A new icon appeared. VLS cells 7, 9, 12. Network integrity restored. Thorne's jaw fell open. The woman's fingers continued their silent, relentless dance. She was not fighting the electronic warfare attack. She was hijacking it. She isolated the enemy's jamming frequency, inverted its phase, and broadcast it back, effectively blinding the inbound missile's own guidance systems. On the holographic display, a third of the Sizzler icons suddenly veered off course, their flight paths becoming erratic as they lost their lock on the Vigilance. Next, she addressed the torpedoes. With the ship's primary sonar jammed, she activated the hull's acoustic sensors, systems designed for detecting stress fractures, not enemy weapons. She cross-referenced the micro-vibrations of the incoming torpedoes with the ship's own engine noise, creating a crude but effective targeting solution. She bypassed the compromised main weapons computer and routed the solution directly to the CRAM anti-missile turrets. The turrets, designed to shoot down missiles, swiveled downwards, firing their supercavitating projectiles into the water, creating a wall of intercepting fire that destroyed 2 of the 3 torpedoes. The final torpedo was too close. The computer flashed a 10-second impact warning. Without pausing, the woman rerouted the ship's entire fire suppression system, venting thousands of gallons of halon gas from a series of nozzles on the port side hull. The sudden, massive change in water pressure and density was just enough to throw the torpedo's sensitive guidance fins off, causing it to dive harmlessly beneath the ship. She had used a fire extinguisher to stop a torpedo. The CIC was utterly silent, save for the sound of her typing. She had neutralized over half the threats in less than a minute, using systems in ways their designers had never imagined. She wasn't just following protocols, she was composing them in real time. She was turning the entire warship into a single, finely tuned instrument, and she was playing it with the effortless mastery of a virtuoso. The remaining Sizzler missiles were still a threat. Her next sequence of commands was her masterpiece. She didn't fire a single weapon. Instead, she accessed the ship's primary radar emitter, the massive Spy 1D array. She didn't use it to find the missiles. She used it as a weapon. pushing it far beyond its safety limits. She focused its entire multi-megawatt output into a single, pencil-thin beam of pure microwave energy, a directed energy weapon the Vigilance wasn't even supposed to have. She swept the beam across the sky, and one by one, the remaining red icons winked out of existence, their sensitive electronic guidance systems fried by the intense burst of radiation. The simulation screen cleared. The cacophony of alarms was replaced by a profound, deafening silence. At the bottom of the screen, a single line of text appeared in stark white letters. Simulation complete. Result: flawless victory. 0 casualties. 0 hull damage. Time elapsed: 97 seconds. The woman's hands fell still. She took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling once, the only sign of exertion she had displayed. The unwinnable scenario had been won. Just as the stunned crew began to process the miracle they had just witnessed, the hatch to the CIC hissed open. Captain Eva Rostova strode onto the bridge, her face a mask of grim determination. She had been on her way from her private quarters the moment the unannounced simulation began, expecting to find her command crew in a state of controlled chaos at best, or total collapse at worst. She had seen the final result on her personal monitor and couldn't believe it. Flawless victory. It was not just impossible, it was statistically non-existent. The Omega 7 scenario was built on an algorithm that adapted to the crew's defense, ensuring failure. To achieve a perfect score meant you didn't just counter the simulation, you broke its fundamental logic. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the scene of shell-shocked sailors staring at their consoles in disbelief, the humiliated and defeated posture of Commander Thorne, and finally, the quiet, unassuming woman in the gray jumpsuit standing before the auxiliary terminal. The pieces clicked into place in Rostova's mind. The strange sense of familiarity she'd felt earlier, the unique way the woman held her slate, the impossible tactical solution, it all coalesced into a single, stunning realization. A memory from a classified briefing years ago surfaced, a lecture about a legendary Red Team strategist from the Cold War era, a ghost in the machine known only by the codename Athena, who specialized in using a system's own rules to dismantle it from within. Rostova's step did not falter. She walked with purpose, her polished boots echoing on the deck plating. She walked past the frozen Commander Thorne without so much as a glance, her entire focus on the woman who now turned slowly from the console to face her. The woman's eyes were calm, her expression unreadable. There was no hint of triumph, no smug satisfaction. There was only a quiet, patient stillness. Captain Rostova stopped precisely 3 feet in front of her. She drew herself up to her full height, her back ramrod straight. In a voice that was crisp, formal, and filled with a reverence that bordered on awe, she spoke the word that shattered the reality of everyone in the room. Admiral. The word hung in the air, electric and heavy. Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes wide with incomprehension. The rest of the crew stared, their minds refusing to connect that exalted rank with the plain, middle-aged woman before them. Rostova continued, her voice resonating with absolute authority. Admiral Hayes, my apologies. I was not informed you would be personally overseeing the Vigilance's final trials. We were not expecting you aboard. She executed a perfect, formal salute, holding it with unwavering respect. The woman, Admiral Evelyn Hayes, regarded her for a moment before giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a return salute, but an acknowledgement, a gesture from one professional to another. The element of surprise is the entire point of the exercise, Captain, she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and carried an understated authority that made Thorne's earlier shouting seem like the blustering of a child. It was the first time anyone on the bridge had heard her speak. Captain Rostova held her salute for another second before crisply dropping her hand. She turned to face the dumbfounded crew, her expression now hard as granite. Her gaze fell upon Commander Thorne, and for the first time, he visibly flinched, shrinking under the weight of her stare. Crew of the USS Vigilance, Rostova announced, her voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. Allow me to provide you with a formal introduction you should have received days ago. she strode to the main tactical console, the one Thorne had abandoned, and with a few swift keystrokes, she accessed the ship's high-level personnel database. She keyed in an override code, and a new file appeared on the massive holographic display for all to see. The file was sparse, heavily redacted, but what was visible was enough to suck the remaining air from the room. Name: Hayes Evelyn M. Rank: Fleet Admiral 010. Current assignment: Special Advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations. Director, Red Team Operations Group. Rostova gestured to the screen, her voice a low, dangerous growl. For those of you unfamiliar with Admiral Hayes' career, allow me to enlighten you. She began to list the Admiral's accomplishments, her tone like a judge reading a verdict. Admiral Hayes is the architect of the Ares Doctrine, the foundational strategy for all modern network-centric naval warfare. She served as the Director of Naval Intelligence for 6 years. During the Gulf War, as a captain, she commanded the carrier group that executed the now legendary Silent Hammer operation, a mission so classified most of you don't have the clearance to even read its name. She is the recipient of the Navy Cross, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rostova paused, letting the weight of the word settle. The bridge was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ship's environmental systems. And most relevant to today's spectacular failure in leadership, she continued, her eyes boring into Thorne. Admiral Hayes is the officer who, 30 years ago as a young lieutenant, wrote the Omega-7 simulation. It was her final project at the Naval War College. A scenario she designed to be unwinnable, to teach officers the importance of humility and the inevitability of failure under overwhelming odds. She took a step toward Thorne, who looked as if he wanted the deck to swallow him whole. No one, in 30 years of the simulation being run, has ever beaten it. Not once. Until today. Because you, Commander, were so consumed by your own arrogance, so blinded by your shallow assumptions about rank, appearance, and gender, that you did the one thing the simulation is not programmed to anticipate. Rostova's voice dropped to a whisper that was colder and sharper than any shout. You cornered its creator, and you forced her to take the controls. The public humiliation was absolute, a methodical and brutal dissection of Thorne's failure. He stood exposed, his prejudice laid bare for his entire command staff to see. The nervous laughter he had solicited earlier now seemed like a distant, shameful echo. He had tried to bully a ghost, and the ghost had revealed herself to be a god. The story of what happened in the CIC of the USS Vigilance did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the ship's closed communication networks, and then leaped to the rest of the fleet with the speed of a viral meme. It was the perfect military legend, a potent cocktail of hubris and humility, of hidden greatness and public vindication. Within hours, sailors on destroyers in the Pacific and aviators on carriers in the Mediterranean were talking about it. They called it the Admiral's Gambit, or the Lesson of Omega-7. The story was retold in mess decks, in officers' wardrooms, and in the quiet, smoky bars near naval bases around the world. Each telling added a new layer of myth. Some said Admiral Hayes had reprogrammed the ship's phalanx cannons with her mind. Others swore she had typed so fast that smoke came from the keyboard. The core truth, however, remained the same. A loud, arrogant commander had underestimated a quiet, unassuming woman and had been handed a lesson in competence that would echo for a generation. Commander Rex Thorne was relieved of his duties as tactical action officer before the Vigilance even left port. There was no formal reprimand, no court-martial. That would have been too public, too messy. Instead, he was handed a far more potent and personal punishment. He was reassigned to the Naval Supply Depot in Norfolk, tasked with overseeing the digitization of 3 decades of warehouse inventory manifests. It was a soul-crushingly tedious job, a paper-pushing purgatory designed for failed officers. For the first few weeks, Thorne was consumed by a bitter, resentful anger. He blamed the Admiral for setting him up. He blamed Captain Rostova for humiliating him. He blamed the crew for witnessing his fall. But as the monotonous days turned into weeks, the anger began to curdle into something else, a deep, gnawing shame. Surrounded by endless rows of dusty shelves and forgotten equipment, he was forced to confront the truth of his actions. His arrogance had not been a sign of strength, but of a profound insecurity. He judged others on their surface to avoid having his own lack of depth examined. He had mistaken the symbols of authority, the crisp uniform, the loud voice, the shiny rank on his collar, for authority itself. He had seen a woman and assumed weakness. He had seen age and assumed irrelevance. He had seen a low-level access badge and assumed insignificance. In his quiet, lonely office, surrounded by the ghosts of naval logistics, Rex Thorne began the long, painful process of understanding that respect wasn't a uniform you put on, but a foundation you had to build brick by painstaking brick. He had tried to stand on a pedestal of his own making, and Admiral Hayes, with her quiet competence, had simply revealed it to be made of sand. Admiral Hayes did not depart immediately. She remained aboard the Vigilance for another 48 hours, a silent, observant presence. There were no grand speeches, no formal debriefings in the ship's auditorium. Her victory required no embellishment. Instead, she chose to teach in the same way she had commanded, with quiet, direct, and devastatingly effective precision. She walked the ship. She visited the engine room, speaking with the petty officers about turbine efficiency. She spent an hour with the sonar technicians, asking them about the challenges of differentiating between biological and mechanical signatures in shallow water. She ate her meals not in the captain's private mess, but with the enlisted crew, listening to their stories, her calm presence a stark contrast to the rigid, hierarchical world they inhabited. Her most significant act, however, took place back in the CIC. She approached the young ensign who had manned the electronic warfare console, the same young man who had correctly identified the flaw in Thorne's initial, panicked orders. She asked him to walk her through his thought process. The ensign, nervous and stammering at first, found himself calmed by her patient gaze. He explained his reasoning, how he had seen the feedback loop in the enemy's jamming signal. Admiral Hayes listened, nodding slowly. When he was finished, she said, "Your instincts were correct. You saw the pattern. Leadership is not about having all the answers. It is about recognizing the right answer when it is presented to you, no matter the source." In that single, quiet conversation, she taught more about command than Thorne had in his entire career. She empowered the young officer, validating his competence and subtly instructing him on the true nature of leadership. Before she left, Captain Rostova found her standing once more before the auxiliary console she had used to win the simulation. Rostova gestured to it. "The crew has already started calling that the Admiral's chair. I'm thinking of having a small plaque made." Admiral Hayes looked at the simple, unassuming terminal, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips for the first time. "Don't name it after me, Captain," she said softly. "Name it the Quiet Console. Let it be a reminder that the most powerful voice in the room isn't always the loudest." With that, she departed, leaving behind not a legend of a single, powerful individual, but a new institutional philosophy. The crew of the Vigilance adopted her ethos as their own. Their communications became more concise, their actions more deliberate. The bridge, once a place of nervous energy under Thorne, became a sanctuary of calm, professional focus. Competence became their creed, and silence, their shared language of respect. 6 months later, the USS Vigilance was on station in the tense and volatile waters of the South China Sea. Tensions in the region had been escalating for weeks, and the destroyer was part of a carrier strike group tasked with maintaining freedom of navigation. It was the pre-dawn watch, a time when the world feels suspended between dream and reality. Without warning, the dream shattered. Alarms blared through the ship, a genuine call to general quarters, not a drill. On the bridge, Captain Rostova watched the main display light up with a swarm of red icons that was terrifyingly familiar. A rogue state, in a desperate act of provocation, had launched a full-scale saturation attack against the strike group. It was a near-perfect replica of the Omega-7 scenario, a coordinated assault of sea-skimming missiles, an unseen submarine launching torpedoes, and a crippling electronic warfare offensive. It was the unwinnable scenario made real. In the CIC, a new tactical action officer stood at the main console. After months of exemplary and humble service at the supply depot, and with a quiet recommendation from an unseen source high in the command structure, Commander Rex Thorne had been given a second chance. He had been reassigned to the Vigilance just 1 week prior. This was his first watch in command. The crew looked at him, their faces tight with fear. In their eyes, he could see the ghost of his past failure. The old Thorne would have panicked, shouted, and led them all to ruin. But the man standing there was not the old Thorne. He was calm. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, measured, and devoid of arrogance. "Confirm threat vectors," he said, his eyes scanning the data with a practiced calm. "EW, analyze their jamming frequency. I want to know if we can invert the phase. Sonar, disregard primary sensors. Activate the hull acoustic array and isolate the torpedo signatures. Weapons, bring CRAM online, but hold your fire until I give the word." He was not just repeating the actions he had witnessed. He was embodying the philosophy behind them. He trusted his crew. He listened to their reports. He saw the whole board, not just the immediate threats. He was conducting an orchestra, not shouting into a storm. He guided his team through the haze gambit with a steady hand. He used the enemy's own signals against them. He vented the Halon system to deflect a torpedo at the last second. And when the time came, he focused the spy, 1D radar into a weapon, burning the last wave of missiles from the sky. It was a flawless defense, a perfect execution of an impossible strategy. When the last red icon vanished from the screen, Thorne took a slow, steadying breath. He had not just saved the ship, he had redeemed himself. He had finally, truly learned the lesson of Omega 7. That strength is found not in the volume of one's voice, but in the quiet depth of one's competence. The story of the Vigilance's real-world defense became as legendary as the simulation that preceded it. It was cited in the official after-action report as a textbook case of modern naval tactics, a testament to superior training and leadership. Commander Thorne received a commendation, but he knew the credit belonged to the quiet woman in the gray jumpsuit. Her legacy was not a plaque on a wall or a name in a history book. Her legacy was in the calm, confident actions of a once arrogant commander. It was in the empowered voice of a young ensign. It was in the institutional memory of a crew that had learned to value substance over style, competence over charisma. The tale of Admiral Evelyn Hayes and the Omega 7 simulation is now a required case study for all first-year midshipmen at the Naval Academy. It is taught not as a lesson in tactics, but as a lesson in character. It serves as a permanent, powerful reminder that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom, that prejudice is a self-inflicted wound, and that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one you overlook. True authority is not granted by rank or title. It is earned through demonstrated excellence. It is quiet. It is professional. It is undeniable. It proves that the greatest strength is not the ability to command attention, but the quiet confidence that needs no attention at all. The world is full of loud voices demanding respect, but it is the quiet professionals, the silent experts, the unassuming masters of their craft, who truly shape the course of history. They are the foundation upon which everything else is built, the silent guardians who prove, time and time again, that what you speaks so loudly, no one can hear what you say. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a person's actions define their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.